Wyoming Territory, 1872. The wind cut sharp through the still morning, and the snow had not yet melted from the high ridges above Bitter Creek when they sold her. Brielle Boone stood barefoot in the dirt behind McCready's trading post, wrists cinched with twine, chin high despite the bruising. She was 21 and too soft in the hips and chest to suit the rancher who had lost interest after branding her unfit. His words still clung to her skin like ash. "She eats too much," he'd spat, gesturing to her curves like they were a sin. "Got no use for a woman who takes up that much space." The men who gathered to bid on her were rough with their eyes, more interested in her body than her soul, but that was not what made her heart hammer like a trapped bird. It was the knowing that no one there saw her as a person, just a burden. A trade. Quinn Halston had not meant to stop in Bitter Creek that day. He had only come down off the Mesa Ridge to barter for nails and flour before the spring thaw. His horse was restless, his beard a week too long, and he had not spoken more than 10 words to another soul in 3 days. He had not planned for her. He spotted her as he stepped out of the post, saw the way she stood proud, even with rope biting into her skin. She reminded him of a half-broke mare, all defiance and sorrow and something too wild to cage. And when one of the men reached out to grab her by the waist, Quinn moved. "Do not touch her." His voice cut through the murmurs like a knife. The man turned, sneering. "You bidding or preaching, cowboy?" Quinn did not answer. He just reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a coin pouch and tossed it at McCready's feet. "Take it, all of it. She goes with me." Brielle blinked, stunned. No one had ever bought her without looking at her like a prize hog. McCready counted the coins, shrugged, and nodded. "She's yours." Quinn stepped forward and sliced her bindings with the tip of his knife. She flinched at first, then steadied herself. He offered his coat. She hesitated, then took it. "Name's Quinn Halston," he said quietly. She looked up at him, her lip trembling. "Brielle Boone." He nodded once. "Let's go." They rode in silence for hours, the wind biting, the road long. Quinn did not speak unless necessary, and Brielle did not ask questions. She clung to his coat and the saddle horn, her legs aching, heart raw. When dusk fell, they set camp beneath a stand of cottonwoods near the creek. He gave her the bedroll, took the cold ground for himself. "You do not have to fear me," he said, voice low as firelight. "I do not fear you," she said. "I just do not know what you want." He looked at her, then really looked. "I do not want anything from you." The quiet that followed settled deep. She believed him. The next morning, she woke to the smell of biscuits warming over the fire and a tin cup of coffee in her hand. Quinn was already saddling the horses. "Where are we going?" she asked. "I have a ranch west of here near Elk Hollow, needs tending. Figured you might want work, a place to rest." Her hands tightened around the cup. "You do not want me to be your wife," he met her eyes. "No. Not unless you want that, too. I am not that kind of man." Something in her chest twisted relief, confusion, hope. She nodded slowly. They reached his land by late afternoon. It was not much, one main cabin, a small barn, and fields that had not been plowed since autumn, but it was clean and quiet. The kind of place where a person might heal. He showed her the cabin, gave her the front bedroom. "I will take the cot in the barn," he said. She turned to him, brow furrowed. "Why are you doing this?" Quinn paused, hat in hand. "Because someone should have a choice. You were not given one." That night, after he left, Brielle sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the quilt. No one had ever given her anything without expecting something in return. She did not know what to do with kindness that asked for nothing. The days became rhythm. Brielle helped with the chickens, swept the porch, learned to cut fence wire and patch torn shirts. Quinn taught her how to saddle a horse, how to check for frost damage in the root cellar. He was patient, quiet. He smiled sometimes, and when he did, it reached his eyes. And he never once looked at her like she was too much. Spring crept into summer, and with it came laughter. Brielle cooked and teased him for eating too fast. He fixed her boot heel and muttered that she was hard on leather. They shared coffee on the porch and watched thunderstorms roll in across the hills. She caught him watching her once when she bent to gather eggs, and his face turned red when he realized. She started wearing her hair loose. One evening, after supper, she sat beside him on the porch step. "You been married before?" she asked. "No," he said. "You?" She shook her head. "Almost. But I think he just wanted someone to cook and keep quiet." He looked at her then, voice low. "You do not strike me as quiet." She laughed, a real laugh, and he smiled. Later that night she stood at the doorway of the barn, watching him work by lantern light. He looked up, surprised. "I cannot sleep," she said. He wiped his hands on a cloth. "You want to sit a while?" She nodded. They sat in silence, the smell of hay and horses around them. "I do not know how to belong anywhere," she said after a long while. "You belong here," he said, and she turned to look at him. "Why me?" she asked, throat tight. "You could have picked any woman." He looked at her, truly looked, like she was the only thing in the room. "Because you still stood tall, even when they tried to break you. Because you are strong, and because you are beautiful." Her breath caught. "You think so?" He reached out slowly, brushing a curl from her cheek. "I know so." She leaned in then, unsure, but he met her halfway, gentle, reverent. Their first kiss was soft, like a promise. When they pulled back, she rested her forehead against his. "I want to stay," she whispered. "Then stay," he said. "As long as you want. As long as you will have me." And in the quiet of the barn, with the horses shifting and the lantern light flickering, Brielle Boone finally felt chosen. For the first time in her life, she was not too much. She was just enough. By early June, the river behind the Halston ranch had dropped low enough to wade, and the chokecherries were beginning to ripen on the southern slope. The long thaw was behind them, and the land had turned the color of sun-warmed wheat and pine sap. Life moved quieter in the high country that time of year. There were fences to mend, calves to brand, but the days stretched long and steady. Brielle had begun to rise before the sun, her hands calloused from labor she'd never been trusted with until now. She didn't ask Quinn what needed doing. She'd learned to read the rhythms of the place herself. She moved with purpose, feeding the chickens before the rooster had time to crow, hauling water from the well without waiting for help. One morning, while she was scrubbing a saddle blanket under the cottonwood behind the barn, Quinn appeared with a half-built wagon wheel over one shoulder. "You ever done any carpentry?" he asked, setting the wheel frame down beside her. She wrung the blanket out and pushed a damp curl out of her eye. "Never been allowed near a hammer." He knelt beside the wheel, pulling a drawknife from his belt. "That's so. They said it wasn't a woman's task, said I'd ruin the grain or dull the blade." She paused. "Like I had some curse in my hands." He passed her the knife without looking up. "Try it." She took it, the weight unfamiliar. The blade bit into the wood and she hesitated. "Don't fight it," he said. "Let the knife do the work." She pulled again, slower this time, and a long curl of pine peeled away. She looked up at him, a breath catching in her throat. He nodded once and went back to work. That afternoon, while she shelled beans by the porch, a wagon approached from the east trail. She stood, wiping her palms on her skirt. The man who climbed down wore a faded gray hat and a badge pinned to his vest. "Halston," the marshal called, stepping forward. Quinn came from the barn, wiping axle grease from his hands. "Marshal Keene," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Didn't expect company." The marshal glanced toward Brielle, then looked back. "You took a girl out of Bitter Creek last month." Quinn crossed his arms. "She wasn't a prisoner. The man who sold her filed a claim, says she was bonded labor, claims you stole his property." Brielle's stomach turned. She stepped forward, voice firm. "He's lying." Keen didn't look at her. "I'm not here to pass judgment, just passing on the warning. He's heading west, might come looking." Quinn nodded once. "He'll find nothing to claim here." The marshal tipped his hat, then turned back toward the trail. The wagon creaked as it rolled away. Brielle stood still until the dust settled. Quinn looked at her. "He won't force you back." Her hands were clenched at her sides. "If he comes, I won't be hiding." That night, the air grew thick with the scent of pine pitch and smoke as a summer storm rolled across the ridgeline. Brielle sat at the edge of the hearth, mending a shirt where the elbow had split. Quinn sat across the room, oiling a rifle. "You ever had to run before?" she asked. He set the cloth aside. "Once, when I was 17. My uncle took a beating to me for taking bread from his cellar. I ran south and never looked back." She nodded, fingers threading the needle. "I used to dream of running, but I never had a direction, just wanted out. You have one now." She looked up. "I think I do." He didn't speak right away. Then, "I built this place to be quiet, thought I needed to keep the world away, but you make it feel like something worth holding on to." She set the mending aside. "I don't know what I'm supposed to be to you." "You already are," he said gently. "You just don't see it yet." The wind howled against the windows and the fire popped behind her. She crossed the space between them, kneeling beside his chair. "I want to stay," she said, voice steady. "But only if I'm beside you, not in some separate room." "Not behind you." He reached out, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. "Then beside me it is." She leaned her head against his knee, and he rested a hand on her shoulder. They stayed like that until the fire burned low. At dawn, he built her a workbench outside the barn, beneath the eaves. Not because she asked. Because she belonged there now, not as a guest, not as a burden, but as something steady and claimed. And when she placed her tools on it that afternoon, she did not ask if they were allowed. She simply began. By late July, the heat settled thick over Elk Hollow, and the hills breathed pine sap and dust. The creek had slowed to a murmur, and the meadow grass browned at the edges. Brielle stood barefoot in the garden rows, the hem of her skirt damp from watering squash vines. She had tied her hair back with a strip of muslin, and sweat dotted her collarbone. A hawk cried high above as she leaned to pull a stubborn weed, her fingers strong from weeks of soil and rope. Quinn stepped out of the barn with a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. He paused, watching her work. She didn't look up. "You're planting too close," he said, nodding toward the beans. She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "They'll climb together, shade each other." He tilted his head. "Might crowd out air, they'll manage." Her eyes held steady on his. "Things grow better when they lean on something." He nodded, stepping closer. "Fair enough." Later that afternoon, a rider came down from the north trail. Quinn spotted him first, standing in the shadow of the barn. The horse was lathered, the man slumped in the saddle. "Doc Abner's boy," Quinn said, already moving. Brielle followed, heart quickening. The rider slid down, clutching his side. "My pa, he fell from the hay loft, ain't waking. Ma can't lift him." Quinn turned to Brielle. "Saddle both horses, I'll get the salve and cloth." She didn't hesitate. Within minutes, they were galloping west toward the Abner homestead, dust rising behind them in long, trembling lines. When they arrived, the old man lay pale on a straw mattress, lips tinged blue. Quinn knelt beside him, peeling back the collar of his shirt. "Ribs are broke," he said, quiet. "He's breathing shallow." Brielle soaked cloth in cool water and pressed it to the man's brow. The room smelled of old wood and worry. The Abner woman clutched her apron, eyes wide. "He's stubborn," she said, voice cracking. "Wouldn't wait for help." Quinn looked to Brielle. "We'll need to stay the night. Help her turn him, keep him breathing." Brielle nodded. They slept in shifts, waking to check the old man's breath, lifting him gently to ease his lungs. Brielle fed the stove and boiled willow bark for pain. Quinn kept count of each breath, his hand steady on the man's chest. By dawn, the old man stirred. "You two are ghosts," he rasped. Quinn smiled faintly. "Just neighbors." The ride back was slow. The sun hung low and the horses walked without urging. Brielle rode beside Quinn, her posture easy in the saddle. "You didn't flinch once," he said. "Didn't have time to." He glanced at her. "You're not like most folk," she shrugged. "I didn't grow up soft." He was quiet a long while. Then, "I saw my mother die in a cholera camp when I was 16. She hadn't eaten in days, but she gave me her last meal anyway. I think that's why I can't bear to watch someone go hungry or be cast aside." Brielle turned her head, her voice low. "You carry that kind of love with you." He looked at her, something shifting in his chest. "So do you." They reached the ranch before sundown. The chickens clucked irritably and the sky turned to copper. Inside, Brielle lit the lamp and washed her hands at the basin. Quinn stood in the doorway, watching her fingers move through the water. "You ever miss anything from before?" he asked. She dried her hands slowly. "I miss having a sister to talk to. She married at 16 and moved east. I don't know if she'd even recognize me now." "She might," he said. "You still carry your heart honest." She looked up, blinking fast. "I didn't think I had anything left to carry." He stepped forward, took her hand. "You carried yourself all the way here." She looked down at their joined hands, then back up. "I'm not scared anymore." He leaned forward, his forehead brushing hers. "Neither am I." And when she kissed him, there was no trembling, no question. Only surety, like the land waking after frost, like roots deepening beneath warm earth. The fire inside the hearth crackled low, and outside the night settled quiet and whole. August brought a dry heat that settled deep into the grain of the porch boards and turned the hillsides brittle. The wind carried dust more than it did scent, and the cattle lingered near the shade of the cottonwoods, tails swishing slow. Quinn had started rising earlier, before the sun crested the ridge, and Brielle began keeping a tally of eggs in the ledger he left on the kitchen shelf. One morning, as she buttoned her blouse in the quiet of the cabin, she caught her reflection in the small tin mirror above the washstand. Her face had changed, not softer, but steadier. There was weight in her eyes now, not like a burden, but like the kind of knowing one earned through being tested and still choosing to stay. She tied her hair back and stepped outside. Quinn was already out near the eastern fence line, hammering in a fresh post. She picked her way through the dry grass, brushing past sage. "You missed breakfast," she said. He didn't pause. "You left coffee. That counts." She leaned against the next post, arms folded. "Thought I'd ride to the trading post today. We're near out of salt." He set the hammer down, brushing his hands on his trousers. "I'll hitch the wagon. I can take the mare." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but take the rifle. I heard someone's been losing chickens up near the bluff." She mounted just after midday, rifle slung across the saddle, and rode out past the creek, letting the mare pick her pace. The land rolled slow and wide, with silver grass and scattered cottonwoods, the whole world dusted in that late summer hush. At the trading post, the shelves were thinner than they'd been in spring. The clerk, a freckled boy with a lazy eye, nodded when she asked after salt and matches. "You're that woman from the Halston place," he said, wrapping the parcel in brown paper. She met his gaze. "I am." He's not much for talk, that one. He doesn't need to be. The boy looked like he wanted to say more, but she took the bundle and walked out before he could. Outside, she found her mare tied where she'd left her, but a familiar voice stopped her before she mounted. "You always did walk like you owned something." Brielle's chest tightened before she turned. The man leaning against the post wore a tan coat and a wide black hat, his boots too polished for the dust around him. Caleb Frisk, the man who'd signed her over like livestock. I didn't recognize you without someone else's rope around your wrists, he said. She didn't speak. You think you got free, you don't get to walk away from what you owe. I owed nothing, she said, her voice flat. He stepped closer. You were mine. Not anymore. His smile never reached his eyes. You forget what you came from. She laid her hand on the rifle tied to her saddle. I remember everything, especially the part where you lost. Frisk's mouth curled, but he didn't move closer. Tell your cowboy I'll be seeing him. She swung into the saddle. He'll be ready. The ride back felt longer, the heat meaner. Dust clung to her skin like ash. When she reached the ranch, Quinn was by the well hauling up the last bucket. You saw him, he said without needing to ask. She handed him the parcel. He's still wearing that hat like it means something. Quinn took the bundle, eyes narrowed. He say anything, he said he'd come. Quinn nodded. Then we'll be ready. That night neither of them slept early. Brielle sat at the table, wiping down the rifle with slow, sure strokes. Quinn sharpened his knife by lamplight. The silence between them wasn't heavy, just full. You ever kill a man? She asked. Not unless I had to. She looked at him. Would you if it came to that? He met her eyes. If someone laid a hand on you, I'd do worse. She didn't look away. You don't have to fight for me. I'm not. He set the knife down. I'm fighting with you. That's different. She stood, walked to where he sat, and placed her hand on his shoulder. Then I'll fight with you too. He reached up, covered her fingers with his. I know. They stayed close after that, the quiet between them not empty, but lit with something steady and warm. Outside, the wind began to rise, whistling low through the pine boards. And inside they waited, not for fear, but with the knowing that whatever came, they would face it side by side. The morning Frisk came. The sky was overcast, the light thin and gray like smoke. A wind had risen from the south during the night and hadn't let up, brushing through the cottonwoods with a restless whisper. Quinn had already moved the livestock to the far pasture, left the gate open wide. He'd sanded the porch boards the day before, so they wouldn't creak underfoot. Brielle stood by the hearth, rolling up the sleeves of her work dress. She'd tied her braid high and her boots were laced tight. A coil of rope hung by the door and the rifle lay loaded on the table beside the sugar tin. She didn't sit. Quinn came in from the barn with his hat in hand. His face held no anger, only a calm readiness, like a man who'd already counted the hours and found peace in their measure. He's not riding alone, he said. 2 others with him. Hired hands, maybe. Brielle nodded. They aiming to scare us, could be. Or hoping we'll hand you over easy. She looked at him fully. You know I'd rather bleed out on this floor than let him touch me again. I know, he said, but you won't have to. The 3 riders came in slow, not galloping, but with the kind of easy arrogance that spread like a rot. Frisk stayed in the lead, reins loose in his hands, his coat flapping behind him. The other 2 hung back, their faces unreadable beneath their hats. Brielle stepped out onto the porch beside Quinn, her shoulders square. She didn't blink when Frisk dismounted and strolled forward like he was visiting an old friend. You've gone and built yourself something pretty here, he said. Shame it's built on stolen ground. Quinn didn't move. You're not welcome here. Frisk's gaze slid to Brielle. You didn't tell him about the contract, about what I paid. There was never a contract, she said. Only a lie too small for the law to bother with. You think standing beside a man like this changes what you are. Quinn's hand tightened around the edge of the porch rail, but he said nothing. Brielle stepped down 1 step. I know exactly what I am. I work, I build, I bleed. I stand beside someone who sees me whole. You never did. Frisk smiled without warmth. You think this ends with a speech? He motioned to the men behind him, but one of them hesitated. Quinn's voice was steady. You fire a shot on my land and I'll bury you where you fall. The second man shifted in his saddle. You didn't say anything about shooting. Frisk turned, angry now. You're paid to stand behind me. The first hired man looked past him at Brielle. She doesn't look like someone who needs saving. Frisk took a step forward, hand near his belt. She belongs to me. Before he could reach for anything, Brielle lifted the rifle from beside the door and leveled it. Her voice didn't shake. She never belonged to anyone. He froze. Quinn didn't reach for his weapon. He didn't need to. Frisk's face twitched. You gonna kill me? No, Brielle said. But I'll send you limping into the next county if you take one more step. Frisk looked between them, eyes darting like a cornered dog. Then he spat in the dirt and turned. You'll regret this. Quinn's voice was quiet. No, we won't. The two hired men didn't follow Frisk when he mounted. They turned their horses and rode the other direction without a word. Frisk rode east alone. By the time the sun broke through the low clouds, the yard was empty again. Inside, Brielle set the rifle down and leaned against the doorframe. Her breath came fast, but her hands were still. Quinn watched her. You were steady. She looked at him, eyes clear. I wasn't scared of him, not anymore. He stepped closer, brushing her cheek with his thumb. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. I don't want to fight anymore, she whispered. I want to build. I want to grow things. I want to wake up beside you every morning and know I'm safe. He kissed her then, not quick, but slow and certain, like he meant to carry her name in every breath from now on. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his chest. Then let's build it, he said. That fall, the garden doubled in size. Quinn carved a new table from pine and fitted it by hand, big enough for more than two. Brielle painted the cabin's shutters and planted lavender by the porch. She started keeping bees and he built her hives. They traded honey for cloth and flour, and in the evenings they sat by the fire with their knees touching, a kettle between them and no more shadows at their backs. One cold morning in December, she stood barefoot on the cabin floor with Quinn's coat draped over her shoulders and her hands resting low on her belly. He looked up from the stove, startled. You all right? She nodded. I think we'll need another cradle. He crossed the room in 2 strides and wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. We'll carve it from the same pine. Spring came again, and the hills turned green. Their child was born in the room where Brielle once stood watching her own reflection. And this time, she saw herself not as something broken, but as a woman who had chosen every piece of her life. They named the boy Ellis, after Quinn's mother's family, and he grew up with dirt under his nails and laughter in his lungs. Brielle taught him how to bind a fence and how to hold a newborn chick without crushing it. Quinn showed him how to find water in dry land and when to keep his mouth shut. Years later, when folks passed by the edge of Elk Hollow, they spoke of the Halston place as something settled, something good. A home built not from luck, but from quiet strength and the kind of love that doesn't need proving. Inside the cabin, beneath a quilt stitched with old cloth and new, Brielle and Quinn slept with fingers laced. The fire burned low, and peace held fast.